am Kathy Brockwood at the Polytechnic Institute of NYU, and I'm class of 2010 as Stephen said. So the question is, what is autism? Socially, autism is when a child is unable to understand what is appropriate behavior for their age. So for example, an 18-year-old watching Barney, that's socially a little odd. Mentally, autism is when the child does not understand society's rules. Therefore, the parents have to treat the child as a child for the rest of their lives. So if you're 18, the parent is not letting you go anywhere, they're watching a movie, that's what it is. Autism physically for the children is difficult because they are prone to gaining more weight. And emotionally, they're unable to express their feelings. So, for example, if you had a child who is autistic, who is nonverbal, instead of talking and saying, oh, I'm stressed about something, they would bite, kick, or even just not do anything. But one thing to mention, all autistic children are not the same. There's range. So autism is closer to home.
Some of my friends use this thing called autism.
You guys hear it?
My brother's son has autism. My neighbor's son has autism. My son has autism. Autism is getting closer to home. Today, 1 in 110 children is diagnosed with autism. That's a 600% increase in the last 20 years. What are the signs that autism speaks?
Okay, so what you guys just saw was a PSA by Autism Speaks. The boy you saw there was a child I worked with. His name is Max, and that's his dad. We all worked for, not work, but all do things for autism. So one thing I want to mention is, those affected by autism are not the same. Really want to stress that out. So autism spectrum disorder, there's a lot of things. So all of these disorders are comorbid, which means that even though you may be diagnosed with Asperger's, you still may have some symptoms of Rett syndrome or PDD-NOS, which stands for pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So this is just some of the autism spectrum disorders, although trust me, there are more. There's Turner syndrome, Angelman syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, a lot more. So autism is genetic. So after doing some research, I found out that there are genes linked to autism. So this is an autism pedigree chart. So to explain it, what's going on is that you have a grandfather and a grandmother who did not have autism, but their first and third son both were affected by autism. And then their first daughter has a son who is affected by autism, and their second and their last son, not affected by autism, has children. So basically all of these grandchildren that all have autism, the parents didn't directly have it, meaning that this specific form of autism was most likely on the Y chromosome because only the males were affected. And because it was not exactly directly present in the first set of the grandparents, that means that it was most likely on the recessive genes. So that's basically a way of showing that autism is genetic and it's on either the X or Y chromosome. For example, Fragile X syndrome is a disorder that mainly affects males, even though it's on the X chromosome, because it's able to be passed down to females who then have males. And Rett syndrome specifically is a form of autism that only affects females. So next is some common signs of autism. There are social signs, verbal signs, behavior signs. So socially, the child may pretend not to hear you, meaning that they don't respond to their name. They have little to no eye contact, such as this photo, or they don't want to be held, meaning that they're extrasensory, so they don't want to be touched or anything. Empathy is another thing with socialness for autistic children. So, for example, if you go up not to all autistic children, but a few of them, and you say, oh, my aunt died, the child may laugh at you. And it's not because they're laughing at you to be mean, but it's because on the inside they're thinking to themselves, oh, I'm so happy my aunt didn't die, I'm happy. But in reality, they're thinking about themselves and not you, and that's why they may laugh. Autistic children don't normally have a tendency to be mean. It's just how they think. Also, playing on their own. As shown in this picture, many autistic children like to play on their own. Verbally, with autism, you can tell if a child has autism by talking later than 2 years old, or any ability to talk. If a child is losing the ability to talk and they say mommy, like at 3 years old, and then they forget how to say mommy, that's pretty bad. And when requesting for things without eye contact, that's pretty bad. And rhythm speech. So many autistic children either have a very specific rhythm where they talk like this, and I like to talk like this, or they sound monotone. Also having a difficulty with conversations is another thing. Behavioral ones with autism, they have specific ritual things. So, for example, autistic children may get up in the morning and say, okay, it's the morning, I have to go use the bathroom, then wash my hands 3 times, and then stomp my feet 4 times. They have specific rituals, and when broken, will make the child very unhappy. Most of the time, they cannot sit still, and instead of focusing on toys, they focus on specific parts of the toy. So if you gave them a car, instead of playing with the car, they'll look at the wheel. So I have a tendency to call autistic children our future's mechanics and engineers. Sensitive to light, sound, touch, etc., but not pain. So I just want to mention that they're extremely hypersensitive. So current treatments for autism are Rivera, which is an antipsychotic drug, which basically helps inhibit the amount of serotonin being made in an autistic child's brain. And then you have behavioral treatments, such as ABA impacts. So ABA is applied behavioral analysis, where, as you can see in the picture here, a therapist is working with an autistic child on how to cope in society and work. And PECS down here is an acronym for Picture Exchange Communication System, more for the nonverbal children. So for example here, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but it says, I want water, cake. And basically, it's the way that the child can say, I want water or cake. And then this brawl is working on the autistic children's brains. And as you can see here, an autistic child's brain is actually bigger than a normal child's brain. Autistic children actually have bigger brains and more dense brains. When born, they normally have a tendency to be born into the 98th percentile of head size, head circumference to be exact. So autism and all. I was speaking with some parents that have autistic children, and we were discussing some things about milk and etc. So some parents are assuming that milk is a variable of autism, which is leading me to ask, is milk something that worsens a child's autism? So currently my hypothesis is that if milk does affect autism differently in regular children, can it be detected in their urine? So one way of detecting it in their urine would be finding through peptides. So if proven correct, testing for an increased amount of casomorphins, which are created by peptides, in a newborn's urine may be a way of testing autism in newborn infants. Which is great, because if you find out that your child has autism at a very young age, say 2 weeks old, that's super, because there's so much early intervention you can get. You can have early intervention, intellectual, behavioral, and social. So autistic markers in urine. The peptide found in urine at a higher concentration in autistic children is in fact casomorphins, which I did some research on. Casomorphins are peptides created when casein, which is in milk, is not completely broken down, and as a result has morphine and heroin-like on autistic children. Materials and methods I use. I use a computer, BLAST, culminating, and CVI on Autism Genome Project. BLAST is an acronym for Basic Local Alignment Search Tool, where it does pairwise alignment, so you can have 2 different sequences and see how similar they are. W is also pairwise, but you can do more. It will do pairwise for several different sequences. And NCBI is the website where you can get all the information for biotechnology, where there you can search, the genomes itself and protein sequences and do so much more. So, a way of creating new treatments for autism. So, bioinformatics is an interdisciplinary field which combines math and computer science. So, BLAST, it basically is a whole bunch of equations, so that's how you're able to find out how similar these genes are. So some common examples of bioinformatics are genome assembly algorithms, sequence alignment, microarray analysis, and pathway analysis. So pathway analysis can be done by using Cytoscape, which gives you a systems biology approach on it, meaning that you're able to see how these genes work together to form autism. Also, microwaves. Basically, those are chips that have the DNA written on it. So instead of actually having DNA, when DNA is divided semi-conservatively, you're able to pull out the RNA, put it on the chip, and that's a way of holding on to the sequence. So using bioinformatics to create therapies for autism. Here, these pictures, as you can see, are BLAST searches. So right here, these color scores, that's basically showing how similar they are. So black is a negative under 40, 40 or 50 negative, 0, etc. Meaning that depending on the color, that's showing how similar the genes are. So here, SHANK3, which is definitely an autistic gene, right here has some pink, green, blue, and more green, which is showing that these genes are very different from those genes in normal people. So the idea is that with these genes, you can see how they're related or used for autism. So it's possible to see different gene sequences. In conclusion, theoretically, my hypothesis can be correct. This is because casomorphins are not large soluble, which is meaning that they can travel through the kidneys and be excreted as urine. So although the results show that autism can be detected in urine, it doesn't necessarily show that this is correct. So it does not show that it can be worsened by milk, therefore further tests need to be done. It's possible that the casomorphin concentration is so little that the urine test might not even be able to detect it. So, yeah. Next steps. After using BLAST and PLUS-OW, I will be taking a systems biology approach on this, meaning I'll be looking at how genes work together to form autism. And currently I am using Unix. Unix is the oldest operating system there is, circa 1970s. Instead of using a mouse, you put codes in as, well, the presenter had said, and then after that I will be working with Perl. So Perl is basically a computer language where you can do some sequencing and, well, not sequencing, comparing sequences, to which then I can look at the cladogram right here. So cladogram, well, first let me explain what GI numbers are. So GI number basically explains what the gene is. In the NCBI website, this number codes for the entire sequence. So instead of having ATCGG and etc. on there, you just have the GI number. So here it's showing that these two GI numbers separated from these bottom two, meaning that in the future there's probably a link or one direct gene that broke off into several genes that create autism. So my future work, in the future I want to see if I can get some autistic children's urine and regular children's urine and compare the concentration of casomorphins and see how, if it is possible to do a urine test. And by using the systems biology approach, is it possible to see how genes interact with each other and form autism? So here's some references, more references. Thank you to my Professor M. Gabby Brathwaite, Dr. Sapp, Professor Ross, HCS staff, Polytechnic Institute, my family, Keene, New York, where I got most of my research information from. You know, the research when you're actually observing the children. My HCS peers who listened here, and Yummy Coffee. Yummy Coffee is a nonprofit that helps create funds for Keene, where we can work with autistic children. So, any questions?